So what I want to cover today, a few things that we would have covered in class on Monday. So to start, we basically kind of went through, built out our packaging here using just simple rectangles, just locking everything together. All of you over the weekend were to get your own candy to use as the basically the size and the template for the new design that you are creating. All right, so then kind of going through and building this out. What I want to do today is kind of go a little bit further into this, how to set this up. Adding our margins, adding our bleeds, but then also kind of like go over a few things about the basic elements of design and how they can be brought into your layout. All right. So to start, we have the original design that we kind of set up in class. Now what we want to do is we want to create a margin, just like what we did with the poster design. We now want to bring that same idea into this. You still have to think about shifting. You still need to think about bleeds and all this during the production of the packaging. But also the margin is going to help you kind of keep everything organized, right? So let's say, we had some text that we wanted to have sitting in the top left. And then we're also going to have it sitting, on the right. So we're going to have this sitting up here. Maybe it's going to be, the manufacturer, and then this is going to be sitting over here, and it's going to be a little bit smaller. And we want to be able to put these and have them consistent, right? So maybe we end up having something like this. By adding in these margins, it also helps to make all of that just lock into place, right? So this way you're not trying to eyeball where things are supposed to be away from the folds, okay? All right, so to start, we're going to select the rectangle on here, and we're then going to add a stroke. Or you can also subtract too. If we switch back to go to inches, and you can say, all right, if I need to have 1/8 of an inch, I'm just going to subtract 1/8 of an inch that way. But if we're already in points, we could use a stroke to kind of create that space for us. So we're going to be looking at the stroke right here. And what we're going to do is we're going to make a copy, Command C, Command F to paste in front, and then we're going to add 12 points. And then we're going to go to the inside. So right here by default, it's going to be on the outside and the inside. So that means with 12 points, there's going to be 6 points going this way, 6 points going that way. If we switch to just the outside, that's going beyond. If we switch to the inside, then that's going to be 12 points right there, okay? Once you have that set, we want this line only. We don't really want this line. But if I hit Command Y, you can see that there is no line right there right now. So what we're going to do is with a stroke, we're going to go to Object, go to Expand Appearance, and now you can see that it kind of locked in, and it gave us all three of these. It gave us, the middle, but it also gave us the outside. All we want to do is keep the inside. So we're going to hold on to our direct selection tool and grab the group. When we have this, I'm going to hold Shift to deselect the inside. So you can see these two are still selected, and then I'm going to hit delete. All right. So now we're going to be left with just this space right in here for us. All right. With that, I can just go in and hit Command 5 to make it into a guide. All right. Now, you only need to add these margins into places where you're going to be actually having a layout. The sides right here and here is probably just going to be, whatever that text is, right? So we're going to be having that sitting in here, and, we're going to be kind of just sitting and keeping it as, a safe distance here. If you do want to add it into here, then it's, same thing. Hit Command C, Command F. We're going to change it to 12 points. And then align to the inside. And then we can go to Object, Expand Appearance, group selection tool, deselect the inside and hit delete, and then Command 5. All right. So with this, then you want to keep this, as close to inside there as possible. So that way, if there is shifting, it doesn't get, too close to the actual fold. Generally speaking, packaging does kind of keep everything a little bit more constrained, with the way the die cuts are created for the cutting process. All right. Okay, so now you kind of go through this and you have all of your margins. Now what we need to do is we need to add a bleed to our design. Okay. So the easiest thing is to basically select everything, right? And you end up having a bleed going around all of your artwork. There are times that you will see that there's only a bleed on parts that is going to be seen, right? So if we look at these flaps here, for instance, this folds underneath here and it gets glued, so that way then it's not going to be seen. The same for this as well. So really, let's say we're going to pick out these two here are only going to be the ones that are going to be on top of this and also on top of that. All right, so you would not see any of this. You're not going to see any of that. But what you do is you add a bleed just beyond the fold. So you can go in and you say, all right, this is a fold, so I don't really need that, but I'm going to select all the pieces that I know that's going to be on the outside. Like this. So this is all of what's going to be there. I'm going to hit Command C, Command F to paste in front. I'm going to add in my 6 points and align to the outside this time. So now you can see it's all the way around on the outside. I'm going to go to Object, Expand Appearance. And now with this, because there's so many different boxes happening at the moment, I usually hit Divide first and then Unite. So now I'm going to put this back to an outline, and you see, let me change the color of this. So you can see that this bleed goes on the outside of everything that will be printed. All right. So it goes beyond this, but this is going to be covered by this. This gets covered by that. So you don't need to have the bleed go around everything. This here goes just beyond because this is going to get glued to the bottom of this. All right. You can do it this way. In fact, you will see possibly the packaging that you are using to start your design. You may actually see how the flaps don't carry the color all the way over. Okay. Price, but that's, you'll also see other scenarios where the bleed goes around everywhere. So if you don't want to kind of figure this out, you can just select everything, hit Command C, Command F, add 6 points, align to the outside, Object, Expand Appearance, Divide, Unite, and then I hit this, and now you can see that this goes around everything. This is totally fine too if that's the way you want to do it. Okay. If you see these sort of things happening here, so what's happening? Let me kind of backtrack, or I'll just do it again here. So on any kind of corners, you will see so you can see how that goes beyond right here. Okay. The reason being, because it's a corner, it goes well beyond where this line would end. Okay. So because it's a bleed, you can ignore it. If it bothers you, go to select it with the arrow, go to the pen tool, and you just remove that point, remove that point. So now it's kind of flush and clean going all the way through. All right. But again, it's going to be cut off anyway, so you don't actually have to worry about, that causing any kind of issues with your actual design. Okay. All right. So now that's how you would add in your margins, how you add in your bleeds. Now what we need to do, so once we start coming in and we decide that we want to, in this case, I want this to be this color green here, right? So I'm going to come in here, and anything that's going to be in my design, I want that to have this sort of color, right? So I'm coming in, oops, and I'm going to add in this green, and you can see the black lines are still there. Ideally, we don't want to have those black lines because we don't want them part of our actual design. Okay, so we're going to then also need to convert these into guides so we know where these folds are. All right, so you have your bleed here. I'm going to hide this for a moment. I'm just going to select everything and hit Command 5. So then everything is a guide for me. So nothing will be printed. I'm going to bring back my layout. And in this, I can simply fill that with the full color. And now you can see that the bleed goes well beyond everything else. When you send this to a printer, or if we were sending it to a printer, you would end up sending two files. You would end up sending your design of everything, how everything looks, but then you would be sending this file separately. So this way then the printer knows that this is the cut line that's going on, and these here are the folds. All right. For us in class, we're going to need to create them ourselves. All right. So what we're going to do, and this is going to be a little frustrating, but you're going to create simple little lines like this, and you're going to make them a 0.25. So it's going to be a hairline. And then what you're going to do, I'm going to hide this so it's easier. So we're just looking at the actual cuts. We then are going to put them right where these are, and then we just back them out away from everything. So then I'm going to make another copy here. And even with guides, so just like when we built the actual layout with the rectangles, you can see the same things happening when I hover over an anchor point. It's turning white for me. All right. And then I'm going to make a copy over here. And then I'll use my arrow key just to push them out. Then we're going to make them going across this way. Like so. And then it's good to have them also going around these as well. All right. Now, when you have these angles, again, these angles generally, even if you want them to be a specific angle, a lot of times a printer will ignore your instructions, especially if it's something that's just being kind of glued and being placed in there. So with this, I mean, you can come in and make this angle exactly what it was. The easiest way that I find it, is to use your white arrow, put it like so, and then I place it at the end over here. I'll use my pen tool, do that, and then I can select this and delete to kind of keep it away. And then the same over here. Come over here. And then if you need to get it further away, I'll simply just make another one over here and then delete. All right. When you have this angle, this one here becomes a little bit trickier because now I want this to be sitting here. And now you are going to have to create this going all the way over to about here, right? So it's going all the way across. Use a pen tool, create a new anchor point, and then delete. All right, so you end up having these lines crisscrossing. Oop, I forgot to drop that in. And so now you end up having all these lines all over the place. So once you end up printing this out, you absolutely have to have this open on your screen so this way you have an idea of what's going on, because again, you're going to end up having just this. You're not going to have any of those guides there. So you're going to having all these lines on the outside, and you need to know, oh, this is going to be a cut just from here to here. So you end up having all these scores, all the fold marks in there, then you start cutting everything out, and then you'll end up having to figure out, all right, this cut only goes from here to here. looking at the actual print, you're not going to know that, or you might not remember that. But by having it open, then you're able to kind of work your way through methodically and saying, all right, this is a fold, that's a cut, this is a fold. So you need to be able to do this with a clear frame of mind. Okay. All right. Now, once you have all of this, now you're starting to figure out what the design is going to be. Okay. We discussed in the first project the rule of thirds. So this way, when you're trying to work text in with an image, to kind of cover that again, you use a rectangle. Let me change the color of this. All right. So I draw a rectangle inside my margin area. I'm going to go to Object, go to Path, and go down to Split into Grid. All right. So with this, you end up having, hit Preview so you can see what you're doing. You end up, creating your grid that you want for your design. Okay. Now, for a project like this, the rule of thirds really isn't going to make sense, possibly, just because you may not have an object that's going to sit here that opens up the negative space, right? So you may want to kind of play around with what your design is going to entail. So maybe you end up having something where you have a 4, and I think like a 9 to make into these squares. You can see that the actual module sitting in there, creates this for you. So this kind of creates it into a little grid that then you can maybe, work the text into and kind of keep everything, balanced and kind of working that layout. Now, the one thing that I want to stress, anytime that you are doing this and you're bringing in a grid, especially, on the back of the design when you're trying to work in the ingredients and the nutritional facts, you can't force it. All right. And there may be like a given play where you start off with this layout and you start working the design into there, right? So we're going to hit into Command 5 into a grid. And as you're working the design, you're saying, all right, you know what, maybe this, isn't the way to go. Maybe the actual design has to be a little bit different. Maybe the grid needs to be, altered. You have to give yourself that freedom to go backwards and then say, all right, this is the grid that's going to work for me. So you can't ever approach it and say, all right, I'm going to create the grid, force my design into it. That's not the way it's going to work. You're going to maybe start with idea of how it's going to work and the balance, but then ultimately the content that you have to work with is going to dictate the grid that you end up ultimately using. All right. So this is how you would set up the the layout, and you start bringing in your information and start building a design. All right. The other thing too, as far as what is top and what's bottom in this, I showed you the 4 examples the week before, and kind of showed you that, all right, they're 50-50 where someone's going to, rotate this vertically, and there's going to be, 50% that's going to flip it horizontally. It's really, as long as you're saying this is going to be front and these are sides, if it lays down, do you want this to sit, upright, sitting here? Do you want them as they're rotating it, that, this is going to be, this way, so this way, this is always seen as top, and these are the sides, and then the bottom sitting this way. Those are the things that you choose, and honestly, there's no wrong answer in that case. Okay? All right. Kind of going into some of the other components that you need to think about for this project. Space. All right. We definitely, looked at that, with project 1, trying to keep things away, and just letting things to breathe. But it's how all of these different elements are going to play off of each other. All right. It's also the negative space. That's really, the important thing. So as you start working, these elements together, you want to think about, all right, if I'm going to have this as stacked, like so, you know, and if I want this to be like this, you know, where does this go? Does that sit here? Does it sit in the, you know, the space in here? You know, if I'm going to be putting this like that, and then this sits like this. But the one thing you want to be careful of is, you know, things that group together, and let's say this is, you know, pushed down a bit, and then I have this kind of sitting in here. This attaches itself closer to the second word as opposed to kind of keeping this together. All right. So, you know, space is going to help, you know, provide, you know, some of that breathing room, some of that negative space to kind of lock elements in, but it could also hinder, you know, how the person is going to be looking at the actual design. All right. Color, you know, definitely is something that we looked at in project one. But for this project, you know, definitely, you know, it should build on what we did for the poster. You know, especially if you're dealing, you know, with a certain event that has, you know, color that's going to, you know, have that feeling, have that, you know, sort of connection. But it's going to be more looking at contrast, right? So, you know, if I'm going to have, you know, this, you know, background color, if I'm going to go blue and I want this green, you know, that really isn't a strong contrast, right? Because now, you know, this orange is really standing out with, you know, this almost complementary color scheme going on in here, where this becomes a little bit more of an analogous. So there's not enough contrast here. So then, you know, you want to think about, all right, you know, what do I need to do to have that sort of contrast and kind of bring in, you know, more of that color to just kind of give that separation, make the text a little bit easier to read. All right, so color is important to think about how it connects to the event or the day that you're designing for, but also you want to think about how the, you know, the color is, you know, being used in a way that's terrible, that's not going to have enough contrast. Okay. All right. So the next thing is going to be lines and shapes. This helps drive the eye, absolutely, but it also helps to break the design. Just as like what negative space does, there are times where bringing in an element is necessary to help that separation, right? So if we have something that comes in, you know, from an edge into the design, it's allowing that sort of to work into that negative space. It will also drive the eye. It can also, you know, help to, you know, give, you know, a little bit more of a connection, you know, because sometimes, you know, this sitting alone maybe it isn't enough. Maybe we need to have something, you know, that allows it to, you know, kind of connect these two together. It also almost helps to reset, almost looking at like from a compartment point of view, where, you know, this title is sitting here on the left, and then, you know, it's sitting, you know, in here, and I want this to be kind of centered to that. And by having that line there, it allows me to kind of reset the central alignment. Without it, you know, without it, you're going to have, you know, just that kind of like sitting in here, and especially because of, you know, the cap with the minuscule letters, it just doesn't really have that same connection. The other thing you want to think about is the thickness of this line, and also the color, right? So let's go back to this here. Let's bring this back to, let's try that. All right, so I want to bring in, you know, this line in here, and now I'm going to change this to this, and you can see by allowing it to kind of sit, there we go, allowing this to sit in the background, it allows these to kind of stand out and be a little bit more prominent, right? But if, let's bring in, where's the other one? Yeah, this one. So if I have this sitting in here, and I want this to almost be similar in tone, and it's just barely, right? And now it's not enough contrast, but now this with the color, that actually stands out more than this. And because it's also so much thicker, right? If this becomes very wide, this becomes too heavy, okay? But also the same could be true if it's too insignificant. If it's like very narrow, then it almost becomes unnecessary. So you want to find that balance that when you bring in these components, they complement the other elements, right? All of it is connected. Nothing should ever be seen in isolation and that it's only being seen all by itself. All right. So if it is even just black and white, that's probably too thick. Maybe I got to bring this down a bit. Just this way, the important part is standing out. All right. So it's like you're building out that importance, that level of hierarchy, and you want this to kind of sit into the background. It's important because you need it to have this separation, but it isn't as important as the actual information itself. All right. And then shapes, the same thing, right? So maybe if you don't want this, maybe you want to use a shape to kind of break it up by doing the shape, right? So you can see this kind of using the same idea, but now this allows it to have its entirely new way of aligning itself to that space. So there are times that maybe a line is efficient in delivering the breakdown of what you want, but then there's times where maybe you need to have, the actual shape itself to, almost create that compartment for all of your information. Now, once you start working, in this sense, it totally goes back to this. All right. And then you're seeing, all right, well, this grid definitely doesn't work for what I'm doing. I need to go back in and adjust the grid into something that's going to make more sense for the layout that I want. All right. And then just as, with this, you can have different shapes to allow, the direction to break up into a design. Maybe this is going to be now left aligned because I want that negative space to kind of work itself into that shape. But you can also use this shape to draw the eye across the edges of your design. All right. So just like with the line coming in from the edge into, the bottom part of this layout, I'm allowing this shape to kind of cut through the entire layout. And then, the eye is going to want to travel across, the edges into the next design. All right. All right. Textures and patterns. So when we want to bring depth basically into our design, this is a great way of bringing that in. Now, patterns is a very useful layout that, it's just this repetitiveness like across the design that, the text is going to be able to sit on top of. It just allows what the information is to really stand out against, the background. And it's also useful because then, that pattern kind of works its way across the entire layout. Now, when we are creating the pattern, you have a couple ways of doing it. All right. So right now, because of the example I'm using here, I have the trophy sitting here. I want to see what just the pattern on the trophy is going to be. Illustrator gives you a very useful tool to create a pattern. So what we can do, I'm going to come up in here and I'm going to change this to a different color. And then I'm going to create my pattern. So you're going to go to Object, go to Pattern, and you're going to go to Make. When you do this, it's going to open up another window for you. And you want to pull this down. All right. So you can see we're in a completely new layout at the moment. It's basically showing me what this pattern is going to look like. You need to have your swatches, and you're going to see that pattern is now put in as a swatch. Now in here, you have different options. You have the brick row where it kind of moves it off, and then the offset is going to be half. You can change it to a quarter or a third. If you're looking to create it kind of offset back and forth, that's one way of doing it. You can also do it this way. And then when you want to add some separation, you have two options. You can either adjust the width of this. So if I go to 35, you can see it pushes that further away. And then I'm going to go to 82, and you can see how it separates it. I can also come in here, so I can select, I can't select any of these because that's the pattern, but I can select this, and I can make this smaller. So you can see by adjusting the size of this inside that box, now I'm adjusting what that pattern looks like. All right. So then you're going through, and then once you end up having a design that you like and everything works, then you just kind of go up here and you hit done right here. And then with that pattern right here, you create a rectangle and then you fill it with that pattern. So then that can be put and placed into the design that you want. Okay? Now, it doesn't always work that simply, right? So let's say I want to have the pattern, of this goal, right? So I'm going to come up in here. I'm going to create my own hexagon. So I'm going to create on the polygon tool. I'm going to click on the screen, 6 sides, and then I'm going to hit OK. All right, so now I'm going to rotate it, and I'm going to make it an outline. And then I want a little bit thicker, and I'm going to do the exact same thing that I just did with this. Okay, I'm going to object, I'm going to go to pattern, go to make, and then you can see, all right, that it's not, because it's kind of putting a box right around the shape itself. So I now need to go in, and I need to adjust these to get it just right. I also need to move this and have it like so, and I now need to bring this down. So for the height, I'm going to bring it down to start off with 75, and you see it's getting there, it's close. Maybe I need to go to 76 to back out a bit. All right, so you have to go through and try and figure out the perfect placement of this. So you very well could be like a point, 4-digit number to get it absolutely correct. All right. For me, that seems frustrating. So what I would do, I'm going to hit cancel. And what I find that's easier is to actually build it out myself and then create that pattern. So with this all set, I'm going to come up here and I'm just simply going to create the pattern myself very quickly to a point where I have enough of the pattern to repeat it. All right, so you need to find enough of, all right, this is the beginning, that's the end. This is the beginning, but that's the end, right? So you have to figure out where that slice of the shape that you need. All right, so once I have this done, because it's all strokes, I'm going to have to do the exact same thing that we did with our margins. I'm going to select everything, go to object, go to expand, and hit OK. So now I have to draw lines. All right, so you can see I found the edges of this across. So I'm just going to create a line going across. Generally, I will use a different color. That's not part of my design. And then I'm going to bring it right to that point. So that point is going to start at that point. So I can make a copy of this line right down to that point. All right. So when that stops, oops, I did it to the wrong one. That's going to start. All right. Hit that and go to there. All right. So you can see that to there and that's to there. Then I need to figure out this side. So I'm going to make a copy of this. I'm going to rotate it and then start it right there. So this is going to start right there. So I'm going to make a copy of this and then drop that right there. So now I can see that I have this is my pattern. So all of this stuff is insignificant. All right. So I'm going to move this up. And you have two options. You can use these lines to cut into, the design, or you can use rectangles to remove the front. All right. Both ways are going to give you the exact same thing. It's just one way is going to require you to go in and delete a lot of objects. All right. So one way that you can do, I'm going to copy this, and I'm going to show you both ways. Throw it over here. So in this one, you simply are going to select everything, go to your Pathfinder over here, and divide. So now everything is all cut up. You can see those lines from those, right? I'm going to ungroup, Command-Shift-G, and then I'm going to drag into these shapes. So I can see this is the line right here. So I'm going to drag into right before that, and drag right into there, and then drag right into there. But now you need to make certain that all of this is perfect. So you can see this piece is going to throw it off. So I need to select just that. And then I need to select just this piece. And then I need to select these small pieces here. And then I think we're good. All right. So now I can select this. There are, every time that you use divide, there's going to be extra pieces of white or no fill whatsoever. So you can go in and delete them. You can leave them. It's not going to mess anything up. But we're going to select everything. I'm going to group it, and then I'm going to drag it into my swatches to create that. So now when I create a shape of a rectangle, I can fill it with that pattern. All right. So that's one way of doing it. The other way I think is a little bit easier. So you bring all of this in, you have your lines in there. I want to group everything together, minus the lines. All right. So I'm going to select everything, but I'm going to deselect these. Oops. I'm going to select all of this, deselect the lines. So I'm left with just my pattern. I'm going to use my Pathfinder to unite, so it's all one object. Now I'm going to create a rectangle. I'm going to make it a color that's not in my layout. Do this, and then make it something that's not in here. All right. So with this, I'm going to select the bottom line, use my align tool, align it to the top. I'm going to make sure it goes well beyond what I need. Then I'm going to make a copy of it, align it to the bottom of this line. Then I'm going to make a copy of this, align it to this line. And then same thing, align it to here. All right. Now once you have all of that, select all of these, hide them, Command 3, delete these lines because you no longer need them. Bring back your objects, and then make sure that you're covering everything in the background. So this way you're seeing this color purple with this sitting in the background. Now I simply select everything and hit minus front, and I'm left with just this shape that I can then drag in. And then the same thing, when I create a box, I can fill it with that pattern. So both ways are going to give you the same exact way. It just depends on what method you prefer. If you can create a pattern that is going to be done for you automatically, like this, there's nothing wrong with that, okay? But this isn't going to be 100%. There are going to be times that you have to create it manually, and these are the two methods that I find that's going to give you that option to be able to use whatever pattern it is, right? So no matter how difficult or complicated the pattern may be, you can break it down into a repeating shape that can be used in your design. All right. Let's say you go through this process. We're putting this in here. Let me put it. So you have this kind of sitting in the background, and you find that this layout's not really working. It's too big for you, right? You can simply use this again. Anytime that you create a pattern for yourself, keep all the components, don't toss it, because now I can come in here, I can make a change to the size, drop it in, and then I can use that to change it up. All right. So when you are doing any of these designs, make a copy of everything, throw it out into the gray area for you. If for some reason you forget to, and you don't have it anymore, you can go into your swatches, drag it out, make the adjustment. Well, let's say I want it to be now this way, bring it in, and now I can use that as my pattern. So you can always drag things out from here and make those changes and drag it back in. All right. Okay. Besides patterns, you have textures. All right. So maybe there is, a texture that you want to use. A lot of times I will use paper textures that I bring in. It just gives a nice subtle shift, when it's being used in layering to allow the text to kind of stand off. If you do bring elements in, remember contrast. That is the most important thing when you're working on this project when we're dealing with color. So, when we are using, the design or the color itself, you're going to want to use your layering and the way that these kind of work together. All right, so if I have this sitting here and I have a nice contrast, could I allow some of that texture to come through my design? I wouldn't be able to do it if I had a different typeface. Let's say I did, what's a really light, thin. All right, so I have these two sitting in here. In your transparency, I'm going to do the overlay, so that way I allow that to come through. I can then, adjust the coloring to kind of bring that a little bit further out. But the same thing is not going to happen sometimes when I have lighter text. You can see that it ends up falling apart, really. So if this is the direction that you want to, go and you want to bring into your design, the typefaces you choose are going to be very different, right? Especially, with this sort of pattern, right? So if I wanted to have this, sitting in here in the actual design, I'm going to want to be very careful in how this is working against here. Maybe this, I'm going to have to play around with, the background just this way the text is going to be able to be read. So every decision you make is going to affect other decisions, further down. And then as you get further down and you have a different idea or a different iteration of an idea, it very well may make you backtrack and go and execute that idea differently. All right. All right. So then the other thing, contrasting with your text. This is going to be more for, once I start seeing the back of your design, when you're using a lot of that different text and you're bringing that in, just think about, what happens when elements are so much bigger, right? So we end up having, let me use this one instead. So we end up having this, if this becomes so much larger, than that, think about what that says and what's important, right? You want to think about what is the hierarchy of importance. When you start working with the different sizes and you're trying to have different texts and you have different weights that are bringing in that sort of contrast for you, you also have the use of color, right? So think about, even if this is going to be just black and white and just this, you can see in this case Reese's is going to be the most important thing. But if I end up dropping this down, right, and I end up having it sitting like this, now World Cup stands out a bit more. Just because of how bold it is. But yet, if I was to use a smaller typeface, and I end up using this very thin typeface, so even though that it is going to be black, it doesn't stand out enough. All right. So your type choices, the weights, the availability of different weights is going to be important to your design. All right. So the next thing, stroking text, right? So I have this here. Let's say for some reason, this is the color scheme that I absolutely love and I want to use. And I want to kind of have this, being able to stand out. So I want to add a stroke to the text. Just this way it gives a little bit more, contrast and a little bit easier to read against the background. When I have this, I want to add a stroke. So what you can't do ever is simply just add a stroke to the text like so, right? So I can't go in here and say, all right, I'm going to add white and then allow that separation, because if I end up, increasing this, it closes in on itself, right? you don't want this stroke to go in to your text. You only want it to go on the outside of your text. All right. So you have two options whenever you're working with text and stroking the type. The first is to make a copy and then add it to the copy behind it. So I'm going to select this text. I'm going to hit Command C to copy, Command B to paste behind. Now when I add in that color for the stroke, it doesn't matter how thick I make the stroke, it won't close in on itself. All right. So this way is the proper way of adding a stroke. The downfall of this is it's two separate pieces. All right. So when you end up doing it this way, you want to possibly select everything, group it. So this way, when you move it around, it's all one. All right. The other way you can do this, let's bring this down. You can convert to an outline. So Command Shift O, and I'm going to convert that to an outline. And now if I add that white to it, I increase the stroke. In the stroke, you have the options to align to the outside, just like what we did with building the margins and the bleeds. All right. So that is another way that you can do it. The issue with this is you can see because of how close the letters get, especially if you end up increasing the stroke, a lot of times you'll see this overlapping. All right. That's not good. So you want to be careful. Depending on how much of a stroke that you want to give, you may not be able to do it this way. But if it was going to be a very simple, small amount, then this could be the way that you go instead of having the copy and pasting behind. All right. This also is something that you would want if you were going to be working with a texture and you wanted this sitting in here. Right, so we wanted to use that stroke to just allow a little bit more separation. It also is a way to build up your type treatment, right? So in the example of the, not that one, in here, when you're building out the actual layering of your type treatment, that's something that you end up doing. You end up building a lot of different layers. In this here, you end up having one layer, then you have a second one, a third with a mask, a fourth with the outside, then a fifth with that drop shadow. So this treatment right here is actually 5 levels of type to create that execution and that type treatment. All right. Good. All right. So then the only other thing is, so let me lock this. So in here, when you add a stroke, you can see that I hit Command Y, the stroke doesn't appear, right? If I expand it, I go to Object and go to Expand and hit OK. Now when I hit Command Y, you can see, oops. There we go. You can see that that stroke is now part of the actual outside edge, where if it's just left as a stroke, it's not. Now, what can happen is when you click on this and you hit increase the size, you can see that the stroke itself didn't increase, whereas you kind of want it to. You want to make sure that the stroke, expands or contracts when you resize it. So this is an option in your settings. So in here, you have your, underneath the scale corners, the scale, stroke, and effect. When that's selected, let me cancel out of here and go here. And when you select this and hit OK, now when I increase the size, it will increase the stroke with it. All right. You want that to be turned on. If you want to make sure that the effects are going to maintain consistency, right? There are times that you don't want it to, because let's say if you added a 5-point stroke and it has to remain 5-point stroke and you're still kind of playing around with the sizing, you don't want it to go to 5.5 or 4.7. Like you want to keep it at that 5. But when you are increasing and decreasing and you have the proportion of the type size with the stroke size, you're going to want to have that selected. Now the issue is if you don't have that selected and we end up, shrinking this down, or somebody else needs to use the design, like you're designing something for a client that they're going to be ultimately taking over and possibly giving it to another designer, if they don't, have this selected, and then, you have this sitting here, oops, I'm selecting that, and then you start scaling this down, you can see, what happens, with that design, right? It maintains that size. So what I suggest is once you get to a point where you're happy with the way everything is working, I would then go in and say, all right, all of this is good. I'm going to go to my object, go to expand and hit OK. And then I'm going to now have that stroke as a fill. You can see there is no more stroke. So this way, if it gets smaller, it retains that weight in that proportion. All right. So that's something that you may want to consider to adding to your steps. Because when other people, or even yourself, there are times you go back and forth. That's why that is useful in the preferences. And you may, forget, and you're kind of adjusting, and you're working your design across, larger and then a little bit smaller and then a little bit smaller here. And then you want to make sure that it's the exact same treatment. If you have that, turned off and you didn't expand, then there's going to be this inconsistency in that stroke. All right. All right. I think that's everything that I wanted to cover, for today. What I would definitely want to see next week, hopefully there's no more snow coming. This obviously is going to be adjusted. So if we're going to say, all right, today is going to be Monday's class, I would really like to see this worked on. So this way, when you come in on Monday, seeing, absolutely like the layout is set up, your design, is completely laid out this way. I would like you to build out your margins, build out your bleed. I would like you to try this. I know it's going to be difficult. But if this way I can see, and answer any questions that maybe kind of get you stumped. If this becomes a headache for you, don't. We can address it, in person in class on Monday. But I do want to see your ideas for the name, right? I want to see the typefaces that you're deciding, not only for the name of the event, but also, the type of typefaces, the complementary typefaces. Remember, 3. You can only have 3 typefaces. So it's vital that you use a typeface that's going to have a lot of different weights. If you only have a typeface that is going to have a cut 1 in this case, but if you're going to have a typeface that is going to have plenty of different options for you, even if it's only as little as 3, that at least is 3 levels that you can use to kind of break down your information. All right. And then, looking ahead, at the end of next week, which is now, is the last class before we go to spring break. I really want to see everything printed. All right. So that means, we would ideally be here on Monday, and then we're kind of like, working to get to a point where, we see the prototypes at the very beginning of class on Wednesday. So this way, changes can be made. So this way, when we get back from break, we can have our class crit. All right. So that's really, where we're going. But I just, on Monday, I want to see everything on screen. So that means figuring out, how you want to lay out the nutritional facts, making sure all the ingredients are there. On the front, definitely having your type treatment started. I want to see different types of type treatment. That's why I have, this sitting here, seeing, what's going to happen for that. But definitely reach out if you have any questions. I will be on Zoom later today, so if you do want to join to ask any questions, I'll be available. But if I don't see you, have a great weekend, and I will see you in class next week.